A young student newly arrived in England has nowhere to go when her housing falls through. But then she's given an offer too good to be true. Free lodging in Jane Austen's house. Hi, I'm Sarah Smith. I wrote this little horror story a couple of years ago for the New England crime-bake anthology Bloodroot. It got an honorable mention in the Al Blanchard Award. Thanks, guys. This performance is an experiment. I felt I didn't have enough control over audiobook narration. I like to read my own work, and people say I'm good at it. But I have a speech defect which makes it a little more difficult for me to read for hour after hour. I'm a video director and producer in real life, and I wanted to try something that would give me more control without making me read every single word. This performance was created in ElevenLabs. The majority of the text uses a variant of my own voice, created especially for this story. I also used two of ElevenLabs' generated voices, Lily and Penny. I directed the audio by splitting the story into multiple short passages and regenerating repeatedly until I got the reading I wanted. I could also have recorded passages in my own voice with the emphasis I wanted, then change to one of the three voices. This time, that didn't seem necessary. What do you think? Is this worth doing again?
Jane Austen's House by Sarah Smith. Published by Max Light Books. Performed and directed by Sarah Smith. I had nowhere to go. I had come to England to study at a university in the Midlands. I had almost no money. I had thought I had a place with an Eastern European woman who rented rooms. But when I got to the house, I found that between her English and the unreliable internet, there had been a mistake. She had no room for me. She dug in a drawer and gave me a card.
You go there. You no pay money.
I looked at the card. A name, an address, but no telephone. Jane Austen's house? I said.
Students go there.
Jane Austen's house. Student housing, perhaps given by an admirer of hers. It would be modest, but my room would have a view of a square. In Jane Austen's house, I would have conversations with serious-minded students about important topics. We would eat scones and drink tea.
No need money. You go.
No need money? I wrote down the address, and on impulse, I got on the bus. I did not want any other student to take my place in Jane Austen's house. The bus took me far to the periphery of the town, into a neighborhood of decrepit houses. In the late afternoon, I got off the bus into an eerily silent street. The address was not a student hostel, but a house, tall and narrow, with an overgrown garden. It was ancient. It might have dated from Jane Austen's time. It had a bell pull, which was rusty. I pulled at it. An old lady opened the door, a black woman, very dark. She wore a cap, a dark dress and apron, and she held a candle, a lit candle in the late afternoon, as if she might have come from Jane Austen's time. Was Jane Austen's house a museum, and she its curator or docent? Would I be expected to get myself up in a Regency gown and show around visitors?
Come in, miss.
She addressed me as if she were a maid, and I the visitor. As I entered, I saw the reason for the candle. With the door closed, the windowless hall was dark and hardly big enough to hold the two of us. There were no electric lights.
Leave your baggage here, miss.
She showed me through a door into what a 19th century novelist would have called the retiring room. The walls were covered with brown velvet, faded and dusty, but not a museum because everything was faded and broken. There was an ancient table, but shoved against a wall because one of its legs was cracked. An armchair marked with oily stains on back and arms. It felt as though nothing had been moved for years upon years. I smelled dust and a faint stink. Students lived here. Lying on the table was the same textbook as I had bought myself for British literature, but the cover seemed faded somehow, and it was filmed with dust. Some student had been here. The old woman led me back into the hall. The candle illuminated a flight of stairs leading upward. The old woman pointed to a narrow door, barely visible on the other side of the stairs.
That was Jane Austen's room,
The old lady said.
where she died.
This was certainly not so. Jane Austen had died in another city, but there was a sign, Miss Jane Austen's room, in faded typewriting on a curling index card pinned to the door. The door to Jane Austen's room was closed. It was a plain white painted door. I put out my hand. I wanted to see inside.
No, see your room first.
My luggage was already gone. Someone must have taken it upstairs, though I had heard nobody. I was hearing nothing, I realized. No sounds of fellow students at all. I followed the old woman up the stairs, trying not to trip on the tattered carpeting. My room was at the top of the stairs. Very long, very low at the end where the desk was. At the other end, tucked into another eave, was an ancient sagging wooden bed, covered with a quilt that looked as old as the house itself. My luggage and my computer sat like intruders in the middle of the floor. Other students had stayed here. It must be all right.
You see the others now.
Other students were here? Now? Yes, please. Just past my room, the hallway failed, leading confusingly into a maze of other rooms. One windowless room opened off another. The smell I had noticed in the sitting room was stronger here. Dirt and broken things. Decay. The candle flickered as the old woman led me from room to tiny claustrophobic room. In the uncertain light, I almost stumbled over the bed before I saw it.
This is Louise.
I was not the only inhabitant of the house after all. But this was no student. A very old woman lay in a cot asleep, her mouth open in a dismayed O. She was wrapped in an ancient blanket, and the tips of her toes pointed out from the blanket. Her toenails were thick and clawed, and they were painted a shining green that seemed not attractive but horrible and decayed. What? I stared at my guide.
Come.
She said, and led me deeper into the dark. The house seemed much larger inside than out, or how could so many rooms fit in it? In the next room, a double bed was crammed under the eaves, taking up almost all the floor. A woman lay in it, gaunt, crushed under bedclothes. She seemed barely breathing. She sucked in her cheeks and moaned and shivered in spite of the weight of the quilts and coverlets on her. I can't, I thought. I cannot bear to stay here. But where would I go? And it was Jane Austen's house. How could I not live in Jane Austen's house? I was shaking a little myself, like that gaunt woman. Who are these people? I asked my guide.
We take folks in, miss. Those as has nowhere else to go.
In the next room there were two of them. One old lady was in a low bed to my left, so far into the eaves that she would have banged her head if she had been able to sit up. Her eyes were open, trapped, and feral. The other one was enormous, piled into her bed like a mass of fleshy pillow. Her face sagged on one side and her eyes were half closed.
This is Dorothy.
The old woman said.
She needs her medicine. Would you feed her her medicine?
As if she had magicked them out of the dusty air, she handed me a bottle of brown, sticky liquid and a stick tipped with cotton at both ends. Her eyes commanded me. I dipped the stick into the liquid. It was like watery toffee. I touched it to her mouth. Dorothy sucked at the cotton, grunting. I wiped drool off her whiskery chin. She smelled of sour old woman and urine.
Watch that, miss.
The woman in the other bed had spoken to me. I realized with horror that I had sunk to my knees. I was lying half on Dorothy's bed next to her, still dipping the stick into the thick brown liquid and touching it to Dorothy's flabby tongue. The smell of her was so strong, I felt it was coming off me. I scrambled up to my feet. The old woman in the other bed looked at me with the eyes of a trapped animal.
I was like you, miss.
She said. I can't do anything for you, I said. The candle blew out. I called to my guide, but she didn't answer, and I heard a rustle of skirts, and then silence. I was in the dark. I ran from that room, and as I left, I almost stumbled over something else, something wrapped in a blanket that rolled loosely but made no sound at all. It was entirely dark, but for one blessed dim light in the distance. I groped my way forward toward the light. I found myself in another room, long and narrow. On one side, dirty windows let in a little light, but they were so filth-smeared I could see nothing outside. Under the window and on a shelf on the other side, boxes were laid in a row. Homemade boxes, padded on the bottom, different sizes, but all small, as if for a child. Blankets folded by them, roughly woven, roughly knitted. A storeroom, blankets, knitted rugs, more cots, more boxes, waiting to hold, waiting to trap, waiting to enfold. No matter what I did, these empty boxes, these cots, these heavy, painful blankets were stored for me. That dusty book was mine. Those enameled, decaying toenails were mine. It was my house. I had my room in it. I had nowhere else to go. Beyond them was a second set of stairs. I half fell down them. At the dark bottom of the stairs, I saw a back door. I fumbled the lock open and stood in the street outside Jane Austen's house. I ran down the street, away from that place, no matter where. But now I cannot see the tall buildings of the town or the towers of the university. The roadway seems narrower than I thought it, and it is rutted, no more than dirt. No buses have come by, no cars. The light is failing. I see people in the distance, strangely dressed in shroud-like shawls and bonnets. It is growing dark. Everything I have is in Jane Austen's house. The house is still there, more there than any other place. No light comes from its windows, but beside it all the other houses are fading. I will have to go back. I will have to ring the bell to open the door. I will go inside and shut the door. This time I will have no guide, no candle. The room in the darkness beyond the staircase will have a typewritten index card nailed to the door. I will put my hand on the doorknob. I will go in. I will have to go in. Whoever or whatever is there will speak to me, and I will know the worst of everything there is to find in Jane Austen's house.
Jane Austen's House, written and directed by Sarah Smith, created using Claude 3.5 Sonnet, ElevenLabs, Audacity, Reaper, and Second Opinion. Music, Maestro Tlaka Elel by Jesse Gallagher. Cover image by Anthony Mayfield. Cover designed in Affinity Photo. A sound rights audiobook published by Max Light Books. Copyright 2024 by Sarah Smith. All rights reserved.